I'm Sarah Owsley. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for Empower Missouri, and I am really thrilled to have that role and to be joining all of you today. Our next slide is just some information about us as an organization. Hopefully many of you are familiar with us, but we do like to kind of root everybody, ground everybody in who we are and what we do. We believe that poverty is a solvable problem in the state of Missouri, and Clean Slate is one of the things that will help us get there. Next, there's some sort of quick, brief facts about criminal records or conviction records across our state and nationally. Missouri has about 1.9 million adults who live with a record. There's about 4 million adults in our state, so that's almost half of the people over the age of 18 in our state have a past conviction. And there's all sorts of collateral consequences that come with those old records. It stops people from securing housing, especially rental housing, but even being able to purchase housing where they'd want to, securing jobs, good paying jobs, higher paying jobs, or working in the fields that they would like to be in. It really disrupts the family life for households. It sometimes keeps people from being able to be present with their children at different events and things like that in our community. And the good news is that Missouri has already recognized that those consequences really outweigh what has happened with those folks. And so we already offer an expungement process in our state for many crimes, nonviolent crimes, many misdemeanors, and even a couple of felonies. The issue is that we call that a petition-based process, and it's expensive. You need an attorney to be able to navigate it. You will have to take time off of work to show up to court, to be able to prove your eligibility for this expungement. And it really makes it very difficult for people who are in poverty to access this sort of second chance and clean slate and being able to move forward and make the choices for their lives that they really would like to. So when we talk about clean slate or records clearing, we're talking about legislation that would automate that process. So you are able to prove that you are eligible for expungement. Many of the rules that exist around expungement now will stay the same. But instead of having to hire an attorney and take time off work and show up to court, you'll be able to access that expungement automatically. And folks would then be able to move forward and secure a higher paying job or to move to communities of their choice, whatever they need to do in order to be able to really move past that period of time. It matters for a lot of reasons. Criminal justice involved individuals, the folks who live next door to us, are more likely to earn lower incomes and to put themselves below the poverty line with that income. Folks who have their records expunged really quickly see an increase in their wages, 22% within just 1 year. That makes a big difference. That would make a big difference for most of us on this call, but it would definitely make a big difference for the folks who are really in poverty or in extreme poverty. 22% is a really significant bump for them and really leads to all sorts of options opening up for them as a household. And as I mentioned before, the effect of an individual's conviction record doesn't just stop with that person, right? If I'm a single mom or a parent, if I'm trying to contribute to a household, my whole household is really impacted by that past record that may or may not have anything to do with who I am as a person today, and certainly should not continue to limit me. We often don't consider what happens to folks as they complete their time and try to move forward. So our goals with this project or legislation is really to automate that record clearing process for as many folks and as many offenses as possible. We want that to really be retroactive to people who might be eligible for expungement now, but are unable to access that record clearing that they so desperately need. And for new folks going forward, so that people in our state really have the ability to access the expungements that they need. We would like to take a look at the waiting period there to be able to be eligible for expungement. Excuse me as I trip all over my language here. Try to make that a reasonable amount of time, right? Empower Missouri really works on advancing evidence-based public policy. And there's not a lot of evidence that says a longer waiting period actually decreases recidivism. Actually, there's a lot of evidence that shows that it's exactly the opposite. The longer amount of time that households and individuals really live with fewer options becomes a much bigger crisis point, and folks feel really trapped. And we know that that does increase recidivism. And so reducing that length of time that folks have to wait is a good, smart move for our state. And making sure that those folks then know that their record has been expunged and what that allows them to do. There might be cases where some of those records are still accessible to law enforcement or the courts, and folks should know that. They also should know that you don't have to tell your landlord anymore that you have this past record that has nothing to do with who you are and what kind of renter you are, and that they are free to really check no on job applications and things like that, which may ask if you have a criminal record. The biggest and largest and loudest question we always get is, what type of offenses are we looking at automating the expungement process for? Because there might be some folks who really feel like we shouldn't automate certain types of records. Missouri already allows for an expungement process for lots of offenses. And the most common are drugs, drug-related expenses or drug-related offenses, and what we would call like crimes of poverty or crimes of convenience. So things like stealing and theft, fraudulent use of a credit card, etc. We're not looking to add a bunch of violent crimes onto the list of eligible offenses. We really want to start with these folks who are already eligible for expungement. How can we make that process accessible to them? How can we make it affordable to them or free to them? How can we automate it to make it as quick as possible so that folks are eligible and able to really take care of or take advantage of what is currently the law in our state? So how are we going to do it? Empower Missouri is working to build a coalition of directly impacted individuals. We're working with organizations who work with folks who are justice involved. We're working with employers who want to be able to expand their workforce and hire to fill empty roles that exist in our community. We're working with faith-based leaders who regularly tell us that this is the kind of redemption story that's in line with their belief system, and community members who really want to see the folks who live near us thrive and reach their full potential. Record clearing is a common sense policy, right? It helps to keep our community safe and help our neighbors live their best lives. And again, like there are some things that are ineligible and are likely to remain so, but we want to make those choices together with the folks who are most greatly impacted. And so hopefully there's some trust in Empower Missouri that will continue to do that. We got a plan here, a little bit of an overview of the plan. Automated record clearance will open opportunities for folks to be able to engage in higher paying jobs, to do community volunteering, to secure affordable housing, to be better and more involved parents. One thing I regularly talk about is folks with records often are then ineligible to become kinship placements when family members might be placed into foster care. And I think that there's a lot of us who don't really recognize what a significant burden that is for families, and how automated record clearance will really help that issue. It's a popular issue in Missouri. Voters of all political leanings really support it because it makes sense. It's something that will really help our Missouri workers and our neighbors really do their best here in our state. We always work to make sure that any coalitions we build are diverse, not just in sort of the demographics that we consider, but we want to make sure that a lot of folks who are going to be impacted by this policy are engaged and at that table with us as we craft the language and really pass the best legislation that we can. And we need all of your help and support to do that. And so we're so glad that you were here with us today to learn a little bit more about what Clean Slate means. And before I leave you, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my friend Scott. I wrote a story with him several months ago. It's on our website that you can read. Scott is a great guy who, when he was about 18 years old, he moved to Warrensburg for a little bit, and he really didn't feel like he knew anybody. And so, as many bored 18-year-olds do all across the country, he started drinking too much and hanging out, partying or whatever. And one night he was walking home drunk in the streets of Warrensburg. I saw a bicycle sitting in somebody's front yard and hopped on it. Not a good choice. He made it less than a block before he was stopped by police, because even less of a good choice was the bicycle's owner was right out front and saw this happen. The bicycle was, about $100 or so. And he ended up serving 7 months behind bars. He's paid thousands of dollars worth of restitution. He's had years of probation, and it's still sitting on his record. He has a felony theft record because as a drunk 18-year-old, he hopped on a bicycle for a short, few feet. And that stopped him from being able to work in the field that he wants to. He works in the nonprofit field here in the Kansas City area now. He's a great guy and a very good dad with 3 little girls, but he really wants to work in finance. He's got a head for numbers, and nobody's going to hire you for finance, even in the nonprofit sector, with a felony theft charge. But that really has nothing to do with the adult and father and community member Scott is now. And he is exactly the kind of person that would benefit from record clearing in order to really show that this thing that happened a while ago is not really reflective of who he is now and what kind of person he shows up to be in our community. So that's it from me. You're all done listening to me, and I'm going to transfer you back over. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's always really, really great to get a human face on the issue. And we're so grateful to Scott for allowing us to share his story, because it is a story that is so indicative of many people who would benefit from this type of legislation across the state of Missouri. So thanks so much for sharing that high-level overview. With that, I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce Margarita George. She is an advisor to the National Clean Slate Initiative, who has been working on this kind of legislation in states all across the country, because this is not just an issue in Missouri, it is a much bigger national issue. And so I'm really excited to welcome her here today and to ask her to share a little bit about the national initiative and why the national organization is so excited about our pending and upcoming work here in Missouri. Welcome, MJ.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be on the phone with a bunch of Missourians. I have a soft spot for Missouri because I spent many years there working on issues like Medicaid and jobs. So it's great to have the opportunity to work with advocates in Missouri once again. So let me just quickly do a little introduction to the Clean Slate Initiative. So again, Margarita George, I'm a senior advisor to the Clean Slate Initiative. I work very closely pretty much on all aspects of the campaign with our executive director, Sheena Mead, who it's actually her anniversary today. So we let her off for a few hours to enjoy herself. But I just really appreciate so much, Sarah, the story that you included in your presentation. And of course, it reminds me so much of the stories that we hear pretty much everywhere. And, the story of our executive director who, young single mom raising 5 children, wrote a bad check, and it has followed her for the rest of her life. And so sometimes it is these small things, small judgment calls that people make in a moment of panic or, a moment of inebriation or a moment of whatever. And then for the rest of their lives, that mistake, that past record haunts them and really creates barriers to them being able to move on to their lives. So Clean Slate Initiative is a national bipartisan network of partners and allies that are, essentially working together all across the country, both at the state and the federal level, to remove barriers to opportunity through automatic expungement legislation. And we work on automatic expungement of arrests and conviction records. And really our goal is just to, keep working with lawmakers, business, advocates, impacted people to make sure that a past arrest or conviction record doesn't become a life sentence to poverty, to punishment, to stigma, all the things that we know are part of the collateral consequences of being involved with the justice system. We've so far passed this legislation in 5 states, Pennsylvania, Utah, Michigan, Delaware, and Connecticut. And I'll tell you, this policy is really gaining a lot of traction in the criminal justice world. But when it started, it was really an economic development policy. The way this policy started was the folks working at legal services in Philadelphia were getting so many people coming in asking for expungement because they needed it to get jobs, that finally lawyers at legal services said, you know what, we can't spend months on every single expungement. There's got to be a better way. These people are already eligible, very similar to what you have in Missouri. People are already eligible. There's got to be a better way. We ought to be able to leverage technology and automation in order to make this process accessible and simple. And if we do that, we'll see that impacted people benefit, communities benefit, the economy benefits, the state will save money. And that's exactly what happened. And so building on that track record of success, we went right to Utah, where we passed this legislation with unanimous support in both chambers, and it's currently being implemented. So state by state, we have been passing these laws. We have campaigns in about 15 states right now, including Missouri, but many of your fellow states, Oklahoma, Texas, Oregon, Colorado, Virginia, many others. And in a lot of states where we haven't yet passed, they've passed incremental legislation to get us closer to passing Clean Slate. At the federal level, we're trying to advance a Clean Slate Act right now in Congress. And at the federal level, there's not even a petition-based process for expungement. So at the federal level, the only way to get something off your record is you have to seek a pardon. And talk about bureaucratic and expensive and long. So really, there's a lot of opportunity to fix the process in a way that really creates much more accessibility for millions of people by passing these measures. And the colleagues at Empower are exactly right. This is not a small problem. It's a huge problem. 1 in 3 people, between 70 and 100 million people, have some kind of past record that impedes their ability to get a job, to get housing, to get a professional license, go back to school, go on a field trip with their kids. I recently had the opportunity to be in Missouri with Empower and UMKC and MCU and others. And a gentleman told me a story about his situation, and he had been incarcerated for a felony. He's been crime-free and out and working. But he said to me, I tried to join a 24-hour gym in Kansas City, and they denied me membership because I had a felony on my record, even though that felony was, 12, 13 years ago. So, it really does impact people's lives in big ways and in very small ways. Let me just say that we know that this policy is tremendously popular, both because we've done so much polling on it and just from all of the support that we're getting from business and really people across the political spectrum. So everyone from, the American Conservative Union to the ACLU to R Street to, there are a lot of folks coming together around this policy because it makes so much sense. And there's so many people who are personally impacted. So we know that the majority of people just agree that once somebody's done their time and paid their debt, the best thing that we can do collectively is ensure that they actually get a fair second chance for a better future. Nobody benefits from keeping people out of the economy, out of their kids' lives, out of their capacity to support their families. So we're really excited that Missouri has shown so much interest. Your advocates and your lawmakers have shown so much leadership and interest on this issue. And we're very optimistic about what can happen, particularly because of what Sarah was outlining, that in fact, in Missouri, you already have so many offenses that are eligible for expungement, and that the challenge is the process is very costly and cumbersome and not accessible. If you don't happen to have an uncle who's a lawyer or a lot of money, you probably aren't going to be able to clear your record unless we're able to pass legislation that creates that enhanced access for people so that many more people have a real opportunity. So I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to be working with advocates in your state. And just on my own behalf and on behalf of Sheena Mead and our team, the Clean Slate Initiative, we just want you to know we are with you 100% of the way, just very excited to be in this partnership and ready to do whatever we can to support these efforts in Missouri, and to point to yet another state that is going to help lift barriers for millions of people by passing automatic expungement. So I'll pause there and turn it back over to Mallory.
Thanks so much, MJ. I would just like to thank you again for being here and for all of the support from the National Clean Slate Initiative. You know, we always at Empower like to talk about how the best policy changes don't happen in a vacuum, right? We benefit tremendously from learning about the work that has happened in other states, learning from the messaging that has been really successful, the coalition building strategies that have been really successful. And I know that we are very small early stage coalition here in Missouri that we're really just starting to get off the ground has been really encouraged by the success in other states and are so grateful for the partnership. So thanks so much for being here. And with that, I get to introduce you all to two of our incredible legislative advocates, folks who have just done so much work in Missouri already when it comes to criminal justice reform, and who we are really looking forward to working with this year on getting the word out about Clean Slate. It was really important to us today to be able to let you hear from them, because I think that sometimes, you know, as advocates and folks who are working in the community, we can feel like we're sort of going up against the legislature, and, you know, that it's this battle. But actually, I think that in the case of Clean Slate legislation, we've been really, really encouraged at how many folks that we've talked to already in the last few months who are really excited about the idea of Clean Slate legislation and who are really looking forward on working on this issue. And that's always a really great place to start from. So I'll start by bringing forth Senator Brian Williams, who I know that many of you already know and have worked with, but Senator Williams has been such a champion for criminal justice reform within the Missouri legislature. I know many of you followed the work that he did last year in his major police reform bill and his leadership on that issue. And so with that, Senator, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here and sharing a little bit about why you're excited about this work ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you, Mallory. I want to thank Empower Missouri for being not only a tremendous advocate, but a great partner with my office. Also, a little bit of quick housekeeping. One, I'm grateful for all the partnering organizations that have been not only a great partner with my office, but have really allowed me to be in spaces to talk about some of the challenging things that impact our communities in our state, and particularly from a perspective in the legislature in Jefferson City. And then I was looking on the screen and have seen so many of my friends. I do want to take a second to acknowledge my lifetime partner in service and former colleague, Senator Jamila Nasheed. For those who are not familiar with some of the work, she was a huge champion, not only around criminal justice reform, but really getting the ball moving around expungement And then I picked that up and continued to carry that torch that she started. So it's great to see you, Janelle. One of my top priorities this year was passing comprehensive police reform legislation. And over the past year, I've traveled all over the state to raise awareness of the issue of police brutality and advocate for police reform. And that's why we filed Senate Bill 60. And this legislation was focused on several different reforms, but some of the few were prohibiting law enforcement from using a respiratory chokehold, increasing the penalty to a Class C felony for officers and correctional staff who engage in sexual conduct with a person in their custody, preventing officers who have been discharged from one department for wrongdoing from simply moving to another. The part of the region that I represent in St. Louis has 35 municipalities, communities like Ferguson, where I now represent and grew up. Now folks can't bounce from those police departments to neighboring police departments under this bill. We also have one of the strongest use of force databases in the country, right here in the state of Missouri, which was passed in Senate Bill 60. Throughout the legislative session, last year I worked very hard with folks throughout the legislature, like Representative Dogan, that helped make sure that this bill took a comprehensive approach to criminal justice reform. The final version of this bill includes several important reforms that would make a significant impact in our community. And some of those provisions I'll touch on. One is the motion to vacate, which would now allow a court to grant a motion from the prosecuting or circuit attorney to vacate or set aside a judgment when the court finds clear and convincing evidence of the defendant's innocence, or in situations of constitutional error at the original trial or plea. The prosecuting attorney may also file and maintain an appeal of the denial or disposal of such a motion. Now, this provision is critically important so that prosecuting attorneys can have the opportunity to re-examine an individual's case and take action if there's evidence that they may not be guilty. So in my opinion, we have wrongfully convicted people sitting in prisons across the country. And I wanted to make sure that I did my part in this state by helping individuals gain back their freedom, like Kevin Strickland, who was now released after serving 43 years in prison. My bill allowed prosecutors like Gene Peters Baker to be able to file that motion, which ultimately allowed Kevin Strickland to have his freedom. And we're hoping and will continue to fight for many more, like Lamar Johnson and others that we don't even know exist. Now let's talk about what we're here for, and that's expungement. This is a very important aspect of the legislation that we passed that involved the expungement of offenses. Currently, an individual who served their time in prison and has completed parole or probation, they must wait 7 years to petition to have a felony expunged from their record and 3 years for the expungement of a misdemeanor. Our bill lowered that requirement to 3 years for a felony and 1 year for a misdemeanor. Re-entering society can be a difficult process, and it can often be hard to find a job, as Mallory and many others stated earlier. And to apply or live in an apartment with a felony conviction, and more than that, you lose your right to vote. So I believe this legislation that we passed will help individuals get back on their feet after re-entering society, and of course, address reducing things like recidivism. This is extremely important, and I think that we've been able to take those steps. And now I've found legislation with every intention to get across the finish line like we've done this previous legislation. And that would allow us to create a central repository where we would be able to have a database to go and access all of the records of folks who may have gotten convictions on their records from places, and it's been so long that they may not even remember exactly where those charges were or convictions or arrests. So we're looking to just really streamline that process and make it easier for folks to access their records and then ultimately be able to get their records expunged and become model citizens. I do want to touch on two more things that's outside of expungement. We addressed some things around the failure to execute a warrant And this bill modifies the state law regarding execution of warrants. As you notice, when a police officer pulls over an individual with a warrant, they must arrest them immediately. Under Senate Bill 60 that I filed and passed this year, even if the warrant is a municipal fee or similarly minor offense, the police officer is not required by law to arrest them, and they can now use discretion and not arrest this person who may have committed a misdemeanor offense for traffic or just depending on the circumstances of the case. So what that would do is ultimately build the trust in the community and allow us to be able to put law enforcement in positions to have tools to ultimately be able to gain the trust of the public. Another really quick provision before I finish up is concerns with inmate feminine hygiene products. Our bill allowed the director of the Department of Corrections and any sheriff or jailer who holds a person in custody to ensure that an appropriate quantity of feminine hygiene products are available at no cost to female offenders confined in any correctional center or jail. I believe having these products available to female inmates is imperative. And even though, I'm surprised that this provision was not already in law prior to passing it, I was glad that we were able to add it to our bill and get it across the finish line into the governor's desk. As I think about just the challenges that have impacted our state, our country, and our communities, issues around expungement, public safety, giving folks a fair opportunity to be model citizens, not allowing mistakes that we all make to follow us for the rest of our lives should not be partisan positions. They truly should be common goals that we all share. So I'm grateful for the partnership of Empower Missouri. I'm grateful for every single one of you. And I'm more importantly grateful for all of my colleagues that were in support of Senate Bill 60. And we were ultimately fortunate to get it to the governor's desk. And we're seeing day one that it's having a tremendous impact on folks and ultimately putting folks on a path to be productive citizens and move our state forward. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this. And again, let's keep it going.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thanks for being here, and thanks for all of your work on Senate Bill 60 and beyond. Like, as you mentioned, already shortening the timeline for the waiting period that folks need to stay in sort of that holding pattern for expungement has really put Missouri already into a really excellent place as far as clean slate legislation goes. One of the things that we have learned as we've looked at the work that other states have to do is that many other states already have a much longer waiting period before they're eligible for that petition-based process. And so thanks to your great work, that's an element that we really don't have to do, right? Really only having to wait a year is for a misdemeanor and 3 years for a felony is very reasonable and puts us in line with Clean Slate's guidelines for national best practices around clean slate legislation. And so that's a really exciting thing for us that, with this other package of legislation that we won't have to worry so much about the timeline piece. So thanks again for your work on that. And with that, I am going to welcome our second legislative speaker, Representative Shamed Dogan. We're really thrilled to have the representative here with us today and to welcome him to give his thoughts on the issue. Representative Dogan, similarly to Senator Williams, has been really a huge proponent of working towards some really great common sense criminal justice reforms and has already filed a number of pieces of legislation for the 2022 session that address everything from legalizing marijuana for adult use, looking at the certification of juveniles, as sort of an additional rider to the raise the age work that we've done in the past, as well as a number of other things. So we're so grateful to you for the work you've already done ahead of this session, and are looking forward to hearing from you on this issue as well. So welcome, Representative Dogan.
Yeah, thanks, Mallory, and thanks to everybody at Empower for having me and Senator Williams on this call. It is just such great work that we all do together on criminal justice reform issues. And I'm a little bit bittersweet about this upcoming session because it's going to be my last one. It's one of those things where time just flies. I can't believe I've been in the legislature for 7 years, and this will be my 8th next year. When I ran for state representative back in 2014, I did not have criminal justice reform as one of my campaign issues or one of my priorities legislatively on day one, but I was kind of thrust into these issues because we had a lot of attention paid to Jeff Mazansky. And he was a gentleman, if you're not familiar with his case, he was sentenced back in the 80s when everybody decided in Missouri that they wanted to get quote unquote tough on crime and wanted to govern based on baseball metaphors, you know, with this 3 strikes business that was popular at the time. He had 3 marijuana only offenses. 2 of them were for sales. 1 of them was for possession. And because of those offenses, he was given a life without the possibility of parole sentence. And at the time that I started in the legislature, he had already served over 20 years of that sentence, which is more than the average sentence for murder in the state of Missouri. And so his case was brought to me by a bunch of activists from different organizations. They had billboards up at the time that were on Highway 54. Every time I traveled to Jefferson City from St. Louis, I would see these billboards, you know, free Jeff Mazansky. And I really became attached to his case. And I got to know Jeff. I visited him in Jeff City Correctional. And it's kind of ironic now, but the 2 people that I visited him with were Shane Roden from Jefferson County, who is not typically friendly with us on criminal justice reform issues, and Representative at the time, Kim Gardner. And we all visited him and were really just impressed by his lack of bitterness, you know, for having gotten that amount of time, and for continuing to kind of fight for not just himself, but for the issue of legalizing cannabis. And we were able to petition Governor Nixon. Over 2/3 of the legislature did so. We had thousands of signatures from Missourians and people across the country. And in my first year, we were able to get Jeff freedom. And that's something that people talk about all the time, especially in my party, in the Republican Party. People talk about freedom and liberty, these kind of abstract things. But I was there when Jeff was released from prison and got to see his family for the first time. As a free man in 20-something years, he got to visit his great-grandchild for the first time in person. And being able to witness somebody receive their freedom in that very personal way, and what kind of benefit that was to him and his family, that really encouraged me and inspired me to continue on, because I knew that there were several other individuals in the same circumstance as Jeff, people who had been incarcerated for far too long, people who we were spending taxpayer money on, and it wasn't benefiting public safety, still isn't benefiting public safety. We had at that time about 30,000 people in our state prisons. And one of the things that we did in my second term was we partnered with the Council on State Governments, which goes around the country, and they do legislation called Justice Reinvestment legislation. And in Missouri, they were able to come in and really take a good look at our prison population at the time. And according to their analysis and everybody else, if we continued on the same trajectory that we were at the time in terms of our incarceration rates, we were on a trajectory to have to build 2 new prisons in Missouri. And nobody from the governor at the time, Eric Greitens, to the legislature, to the budget people who control our budget, wanted to see that. And so they were able to make lots of recommendations and helped us pass legislation, which ratcheted down some of the things that were driving that increase in incarceration, most of which was that people were being sent back to prison, not because they committed new offenses, but because they had technical violations. They would show up late to a parole hearing, or they would fail to pay certain fines that were conditions of their release, and they would end up in prison, not because they were dangerous to society, but because they didn't check the right boxes. And so after our passage of that Justice Reinvestment Act in 2018, we were able to bring down our prison population from over 30,000 at the time to approximately 22,000. And so not only were we able to avoid building 2 new prisons, but we actually closed a state prison in the past few years, and we've eliminated a lot of the overcrowding that was taking place in our prisons, which again is just not helpful to those who are incarcerated, because it increases their recidivism rates the worse we treat them while they're incarcerated. Another piece of legislation that we were able to pass, Senate Bill 60, you can't overstate the importance of that. And I was grateful to partner with Senator Williams, Senator Luetkemeyer, and lots of our colleagues in the House to be able to do that, because there was so much good in that legislation that was really game-changing. But another smaller piece of legislation that we passed, and it was on a bill that Senator Williams and I vehemently opposed, Senate Bill 26, because of the quote unquote law enforcement Bill of Rights that was attached to it, that had a lot of controversial things in it. But one of the things that I'd been fighting for a few years was enabling people who are convicted of any type of felony have been prevented under state law from selling alcohol or selling lottery tickets. And Representative Cherie Tolson-Reich has sponsored this legislation year after year. She finally got it across the finish line on this kind of flawed vehicle. But we're grateful that that was able to pass. And I've heard from several people who are in the grocery industry as well as the convenience store industry who really, really wanted that bill, because they wanted to be able to hire good folks who just happened to have some kind of a felony that didn't make them a threat, or it didn't make them a bad employee, but it prevented them from opportunities in those careers that they weren't able to have before. And so we were really grateful to get that passed, because when you think about it, one of the biggest collateral consequences of having a felony is, of course, the employment restrictions that it places on you. And our employers want to have reforms like what we did there. Our employers want to be able to hire people and to help them turn their lives around so that they are able to be productive taxpayers instead of to be a drain on our taxes. And so we were really grateful to get that. And then one more thing that we've been able to do in the past, this wasn't legislation, but something that myself and lots of others have been advocating with the governor's office for. Over the past 20 years, we've had a growing clemency backlog with several governors, Democratic and Republican, and it reached a crisis point under this current governor. He had over 3,500 clemency petitions that were pending with his office. Many of them had been around for 20 plus years and had never received an answer, never received closure. And justice delayed is justice denied. And we have been pressing the governor's office to do the right thing and just get answers to these people. We know in the vast majority of the cases, the answer isn't going to be necessarily to grant clemency, but at least having some certainty and being able to, if they're rejected, to go back through the process and reapply. That's something that is very beneficial to these folks who have these pending clemencies. And he has granted some regularly. You notice every month at the end of the month, there's a list that comes out where the governor is granting some pardons. There's been a limited number of people who've gotten their freedom and been released from prison because of the governor. And we could not have done that without the help of a lot of folks in the activist community pressing for that. And then last but not least, I'll just talk really briefly about some of the legislation. Mallory touched on a couple of things, bills that I have filed this year that are going to be my last bills. I have 5 that are criminal justice related. One of them, HB 1744, addresses that clemency process and basically puts in some timelines, requires a governor, once he gets a recommendation from the parole board that someone deserves a look at clemency, the governor then only has 240 days to make a decision. And if there's no decision, they get to reapply for clemency immediately. HB 1745, which Mallory touched upon, changes the age for juvenile certification as an adult from 12 years old, which it currently is, to 14. HB 1746 addresses the issue of what they call judicial override, where judges are currently able to give people death sentences if a jury is hung on a death penalty case. This prohibits them from doing that and requires us to do what I think it's 48 other states already have, which is just you can only apply a death sentence if a jury is unanimous. HB 1759, a bill that I filed for several years in a row, requiring independent investigations into officer-involved deaths so that the police agencies that employ an officer who's killed someone aren't the ones that are investigating them. Someone else outside has to do that. And then last but not least, HJR 83, which is my marijuana legalization amendment, which would go to the voters. It legalizes marijuana for adult use. And very importantly, it releases anyone who is currently serving a marijuana-only sentence. And it gives automatic expungements for everyone who has marijuana offenses. So thank you all for being here and for listening to us. And I'm really grateful to work with you in this, my last year, to try and get some of these important pieces of legislation across the finish line.
Thank you so much, Representative. And just so everyone knows, all of the legislation that was just mentioned by Representative Dogan and Senator Williams is already or will in short order be added to our legislative tracker, which you can access from the homepage of Empower Missouri's website. So if you were struggling to write down all those bills quickly enough, no worries. We'll be tracking them for you and they will all be there. You can look on the homepage of our website. There's a tab called Bill Trackers. If you hover over that, there is a specific criminal justice reform bill tracker, and we'll be tracking all of that great work there. Oh, thank you so much, Christine. Just drop the direct link into the chat for us. So yeah, thank you for that. And Representative, that's so interesting. I did not know that story from you about how you sort of initially got invested in this work. That's so incredibly interesting and shows the real power of what a single story can do and how it can influence individuals and systems to recognize that the way that we're doing things just really isn't working anymore. And while it is really encouraging to know and to see that the prison population has dropped significantly over the last 5 or 6 years in Missouri. Missouri still has the 7th highest incarceration rate in the country. And so it's really important for us to look across the entire system as we're looking at reforms, looking at everything from policing to pretrial reforms to making sure that people are well cared for when they are incarcerated, which is something that Senator Williams mentioned as he spoke. And then, of course, looking at these important reforms for reentry. And so we're really thrilled to have the support. So I'm going to open it up here for questions. I'm going to add all of our speakers here to our screen so that everyone is sort of, I think I'm going to do that anyway. Let's see, there might be a limit on how many people I can pin. Let's see what happens. So if you do have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat. Or if you would like to come off mute and ask your question, we're more than happy to have you. We have everyone muted by default just to minimize background noise. But if you raise your hand, we are more than happy to unmute you and add you to the conversation. So we will give folks a second to get their questions together. Sorry, I'm scrolling, gotta navigate the Zoom features here. Okay, question in the chat. Representative Dogan, what obstacles do you expect with your marijuana legalization legislation? Oh, you are on mute.
All right, sorry about that. That is a great question. I think we are going to face the same obstacle in the legislature that we faced with the legalization of medical marijuana, which is primarily that there's a lot of hesitancy among Republicans in general, but especially in the Senate, where it only takes a few people who have a strong opposition to it to prevent it really from moving anywhere. And, even if we were able to pass something in the House, which we did pass medical marijuana legalization in the House a few years ago, it was kind of DOA in the Senate. And, we ended up with a ballot initiative that a lot of people, and we made the argument at the time that whatever is on the ballot, if you don't like what we're passing legislatively, what's on the ballot is going to be much less favorable. And you as a legislator aren't going to have any ability to impact it since it's going to be in the Constitution. And I think we're seeing that same thing play out now. I would hope that seeing some of the alternative proposals that are out there, that there would be some conversations about us doing it legislatively, but I don't have any great hopes given the opposition of some of those senators to any form of legalization.
Yeah, I will add to that I think it's a really great question, and it's a really important issue. It's something that we at Empower are really thinking about as sort of a stepping stone to broader automated expungement, right? This opportunity to, I think, there is a large amount of support in general for clean slate legislation, but that support only grows and grows when you talk about it specifically around drug-related offenses, and grows even more when you talk about it around marijuana-related offenses, given that recreational marijuana is already legal for millions and millions of people across the country. And so I think that we are really in a position of, we will definitely be supporting Representative Dogan's bill, and we're also supporting the initiative petition-based process that's happening, because both of those pathways do include the automated expungement of marijuana-related offenses from records, which we know is going to provide record clearance relief for tens of thousands of people that have that type of conviction on their record. So we're hopeful that one of those two pathways can get us to that ultimate goal, and that we can at least start from that place of expungement while we work on this larger package. There is another question in the chat from Barbara Baker. This question is for Senator Williams. Can you tell us a little more about the bills that you are introducing in this upcoming session?
Sure, that's a great question. One, I really want to kind of dig deeper in, because of the fact that we're talking about clean slate and expungement. So this bill that I pre-filed this year, it would make it more accessible for petitioners and legal aid organizations to access expungements. But what it also does is it lowers the expungement petition fee from $250 to $100, but it also gives judges the authority to waive the fee if the individual is unable to pay or is found indigent. And then the legislation would also give legal aid organizations and pro bono clinics access to the petitioner's criminal history through the Missouri Central Repository. As I think about my district, for example, is unique. I have over 30 municipalities. So to have to go to each one and try to trace any lingering records, it can be daunting. So if we have all of this in a central repository and people are working on expungement, they can also donate there and pull that information and have it. So if someone shows up at an expungement clinic, which we're planning to do this next year, you don't have to know exactly where all your records are, because it's just a complicated, convoluted process. And then the bill would also include a provision that reduces the time limitation for petitioners to apply for expungement, decreasing the waiting period as we've done before to try to lower it even more. So that's what that bill does. So that's going to be a primary focus. It also removed mortgage fraud, forgery, and defrauding secured creditors from the list of offenses ineligible for expungement. So that'll be a really big thing we focus on. You see in the chat also, we put a list of some of the other pre-filed bills that we filed as well. If you can see them, Senate Bill 687, as I talked about, it authorizes the expungement of certain offenses. We're going to also reauthorize a tax credit for certain research expenses, which have a 50% minority participation for women and Black-owned organizations and participants around research and development. We also got a provision that's relating to peace officer standards. So we'll be working with the Department of Public Safety just to ensure that anyone that's getting a background check or there's a situation in terms of just ensuring that information that needs to be obtained before someone is given a job, just to streamline that and make sure that that's proficient across the board. And then we also modified the Ticket to Work health insurance program, which would ultimately help folks who are disabled be able to go back to work and not have to worry about losing any benefits. So those are the primary things. Let's also be clear about one thing with me. Anybody that's ever worked with me, I don't file bills without the intentions of passing them. So I don't really file anything that I don't think that we can get across the finish line. So I usually file bills that I believe that I can get passed. And these are bills right now that I believe we have the blueprint with all the work that we did with Senate Bill 60 to get across the finish line.
Thanks so much, Senator. There's a question in the chat about the time frame for the Clean Slate campaign, and I can answer that super briefly and say that our hope is to file an initial piece of legislation around this in January 2023. So we are very much in the process right now of building the coalitions that will need to do the work. And our partners at UMKC are pulling together the stakeholders to actually write the piece of legislation, really look at, from everyone from the Missouri State Highway Patrol to the Prosecutors Association to the Public Defender's Office to the Office of the Courts in the state, like really pulling together all of those folks to look and see what is going to be feasible in terms of the way that the law can be rewritten in Missouri. So they're looking forward to hopefully having some policy recommendations prepared by fall of 2022, and then to be able to put forth an initial package of reforms for the legislature in the 2023 legislative session. There's a follow-up question for Senator Williams. Interested, Senator Williams, in hearing your view of marijuana legalization legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, there are folks in prison for possession of marijuana, driving while Black and accused of having marijuana. The list goes on. I think we need to legalize it in the state of Missouri, and I think we need to free anyone and everyone who's been put in prison for possession of using marijuana or having it in their possession. So I'm a huge advocate of just let's legalize it. We've already moved into medical marijuana space. So I think we should decriminalize it and we should legalize it. That's my stance on marijuana.
Thank you, Senator. I have one more question in the chat that was sent to me as a direct message. Are there initiatives such as expungement in the works that would help people convicted of felony crimes committed due to mental illness or substance abuse, but who have since healed and gone through rehab, lived crime-free and productively with no behavioral, mental, or substance abuse issues for years. Senator or Representative, anything that you are aware of in that space?
Yeah, I'll start. I think one, we do need to focus on that space. The mental health space has been a passion for mine, even back to the extent I serve on the board for an FQHC and led the creation of a behavioral health center for children, which we wanted to address the social determinants and disparities around mental health at a young age. When you think about just functioning folks who take the ACE test and realize that they have shown high levels of trauma as functioning adults and professionals and folks who may have never been in trouble, that just lets you know that this is something we really need to pay attention to. So I do think we need to figure out a way to address it. I think that's another tool to address issues around recidivism. And I think it also creates a pathway for folks who may have went through some level of mental health struggles, which is very relevant in our communities and our state, that get an opportunity to really be on the right path to be model citizens. So that's something I'm very interested in, very passionate about. Also, the stigma around mental health, especially when it comes to men and men of color. So any ideas that someone have, I would love to talk about it. And if we can look at opportunities around legislation that wouldn't be convoluted and can kind of streamline that, I'm very, very interested.
Yeah, I'm not aware of kind of efforts in that vein, but I do think it's very important to keep in mind just the overlap between mental health issues as well as addiction issues. That's another thing that we see a lot of comorbidity, if I could use that word, with folks who have issues committing crimes, is they're just going untreated for these underlying conditions. And so it's very important that we address these underlying conditions, because those are very often the root cause of what causes somebody to commit these offenses a lot of times. So yeah, that's something I would be in agreement with. And I've always supported making sure that we are funding services for people with disabilities, as well as people with mental illness, to make sure that our society takes care of them.
Thank you both. There is another question in the chat. From Mary Schumann. It says, I utilize MissouriCase.net in my volunteer activities. It is the database of criminal records maintained by the State Highway Patrol and is updated by each court circuit. Could this be used as a database for Clean Slate? It's a really good question, Mary, and it's actually one of the more interesting and more complicated things about Clean Slate legislation is that the way that Missouri utilizes and manages its data from each of the circuit courts. So I would love to, I could give you a very, very detailed answer about that, but I think it may be a little too cumbersome for some of our guests. So I would love to follow up with you offline. The short answer is no. No. And the reason why is because there is not a centralized place where there is historical criminal records. So when we're looking at expunging old data, that is not going to be in there. But we are working with, there's a wonderful committee of legislators and other folks around the state called the Committee on Court Automation, or COCA, and we are working with them on more of the technical aspects of the data behind that. There's another question for Senator Williams. Senator, in looking at your sort of your agenda regarding expungement, are you considering filing legislation to reduce the lifetime limits on expungement? So currently under Missouri law, you can only have a total of 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors that are expungible.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I don't think that, actually the legislation I'm filing, it removes the cap.
That's great.
So the pre-filed legislation removes the cap as well. I'm sorry for not mentioning that earlier, my fault.
That's great news. I have not had there have been so many pieces of pre-filed legislation that Sarah and I have not gotten to read them all yet, but that's very exciting. And it's also exciting, I'll specifically call out that you're looking to remove forgery, because one of the things that Sarah mentioned before, this idea of crimes of poverty. One of the things that we see a lot is people who end up incarcerated for writing bad checks. It's something that women in particular are incarcerated a lot for. And while writing bad checks is a crime that can be expunged, a lot of times people who have that conviction also have a forgery conviction, which then makes it impossible for them to have their record fully wiped clean. So I know that's something that's been on our radar as a priority to add to the list.
Yeah, and mortgage fraud is added as well.
Yes, very, very similar in a crime of poverty, folks just doing everything they can think of to try to stay in their home, even though it's not a great decision, but sometimes we see people make decisions out of desperation, and that's unfortunate. Any last questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. I want to be sure I'm not missing any hand raises if anybody was looking to come off mute and ask a question. Just going to do one more quick scan here. Okay, looks like we're good. So I just want to wrap up by thanking Representative Dogan and Senator Williams so much for their time. Also, Margarita George, who had to drop a few minutes early. She had another call to get to, but we're so grateful to all of you for your interest and your commitment to this issue. We're really excited. There's lots of work to do in the year ahead. Really excited about Senator Williams' bill that would sort of pave the way for a larger piece of expungement legislation coming in 2023, as well as Representative Dogan's bill around marijuana legalization, which would take us tremendously closer to be able to have those expungement provisions in law. I can see that Senator Williams' chief of staff has dropped his website to keep updated on those issues in the chat, and we'll be sure to be sending out updates on all of that legislation as well. We will also be following up with you all. We are working on a Clean Slate campaign website that we will hopefully have launched right after the first of the year, that will also have regular updates on the Clean Slate campaign, as well as places to get involved. We'll be putting together coalitions of many different groups of people. We'll be convening faith-based leaders. We'll be convening some union folks. We'll be convening nonprofit organizations, of course, as Empower always does, as well as many other subgroups that I'm sure that I'm not thinking of in this moment. But we will, there's a place for everyone to be involved. So do stay tuned. We'll be following up with you all first. And also do keep a close eye on, as we mentioned before, alongside Representative Dogan's bill to legalize marijuana through the legislature, we're also going to be doing a lot of support in the first quarter for the Legal Missouri campaign and their work to pass marijuana legalization and the automated expungement for those marijuana charges. They are going to be busy gathering signatures for their ballot initiative in the first quarter, and we'll be sharing out information about how to get involved with that as well. So with that, I will send you all off. Thank you so much for being here. I know we're very close to the holidays. I really appreciate everyone taking the time, and we will look forward to seeing you in the new year. Oh, if we don't see you on Friday, we have our last Friday forum of the year on Friday. Sarah was, I'm sure, going to jump in and catch me on that. Our last Friday forum of the year, Friday noon, we'll be doing a legislative preview of all of the amazing bills that are filed, not only these criminal justice bills that we talked about today, but also bills related to affordable housing and food security. So sign up on our website if you haven't yet. Noon at the Friday forum. We'll see you there, or we'll see you in the new year. Happy holidays to everyone, and thanks again. Have a good night.